The following audio was from the Lunar Development Conference held on July 15th to 16th of 2023, where I spoke on the topic of inner space and outer space and their symbiotic relationship.
Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendon Traxler.
Which is Brendon Traxler, and we have him here. Good. For a change, we have a presentation that doesn't actually aim at the moon at all. Brendon is the owner and developer of Atlantis Sea Colony, ASC, which is dedicated to building modular underwater habitats to be used for commercial and residential needs. Obviously, there are common elements of underwater and the lunar surface. So, Brendon, please go ahead with inner space and outer space and their symbiotic relationship.
Great. Can everybody hear me?
The floor. Yeah. I need my line there. The floor, the air, and the ether is yours.
I appreciate it. Everybody can see my screen and hear me?
Yes, I see the screen. I hear you.
Awesome. So I can speak fast, so I can make up time if need be. But so real quick.
No. You have your time.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'll address your comments about being the outsider here in a second. But I want to give like a visual experiment here, saying, which usually, hey, close your eyes and picture this, but it's a scenario where you're in an environment where you have to put on a suit just to be able to survive. Your family and your friends can't really visit you. Your living quarters are tight and compact, and outside is an alien environment. Where are you? And most of us are going to be looking at, the moon or Mars or International Space Station, but the oceans are also that extreme where that all those things still apply. So I think that really starts the similarities, and it starts diving into that symbiotic relationship. That is the oops, get my slides going here, right on that. But as I was introduced, my name is Brendon Traxler. I am the owner and president of Atlantis Sea Colony, which is dedicated to building modular underwater habitats to be used for commercial or residential needs. So I grew up with a passion for both space and science. Growing up in the 80s, I was watching every space shuttle launch I could. They'd show them at school. And then on the weekends, I'd be going home and sitting on the couch and watching PBS specials with my mom on Jacques Cousteau and everything underwater, his underwater habitats, etc. So I have a different passion. Even to this day, I try to watch every SpaceX launch and anything else going on like that. And so having me here as the outsider may be a little questionable, but I think that there is a lot of commonality that we do have with one another. And I kind of want to piece that a little bit together as I do talk about the symbiotic relationship between inner space, basically the oceans, and outer space. I have been involved in the underwater and the ocean community for quite a while now. And through all the years of talking to people and networking, the parallels for ocean settlements and space settlements keep on coming up. There seems to be a lot of argument or discourse, some negative, where the ocean people, we'll call them, we'll talk about, hey, well, NASA and all them, they're getting billions of dollars of money, and we're only getting millions. It's not fair. We could be just far ahead, type of thing. And whatever, maybe not. But I think that the biggest thing is that NASA seemed to understand that there was a use for the oceans when it comes to space. And the image up here is something I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about here in a minute, and where they use the oceans to train astronauts, to train scenarios and stuff, so forth. There's technologies developed underwater, there's technologies developed in space. And because these environments are very similar, they're able to be used accordingly to each other's different fields. I think one thing that we look at is throughout history, space and oceans have run in a parallel and have often tied together. If I think the biggest clue, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, but the biggest clue is the fact that the moon dictates the tides of the ocean. So just even in the biology and the existence of our two planets, they coexist with one another and are dependent upon one another to survive. And we just start there. Then we go back 50, 60 years. We look at the space race that between Russia and the United States. And at the same time, underwater, there was a whole entire underwater race per se, where there's a bunch of different people were building underwater habitats and stuff. You know, we had all the different rockets that were being developed to the two different nations as it pushed to quickly, who can be the first person to put feet on the moon. And at the same time, underwater, there was companies, organizations, even nations all around the world building different underwater habitats and trying to prove the viability of, hey, can we live and work underwater for extended periods of time and underwater. Both those endeavors ended up seeing some sacrifices in life, and even to this day, it still happens as we push the boundaries of what is humanly possible, whether through technology or just the human body itself. Yet, through all those problems, whether it was technical, political, or financial, those answers were a definite yes. We put men on moon, people on the moon, and we were able to live for extended periods of time underwater in relative luxury. I mean, to the extent you see a guy there smoking a cigarette in pressurized air, which is not advisable by any means, but yet they did it. And this was back in the 60s, so it's a little bit more forgivable than it would be today. But we learn as we progress. And so that's just one of the things. But let's look a little bit here at how the two benefit each other as well. So I talked about NASA, and they run space analog missions. And for people who may not be all that familiar with what a space analog mission is, I've got it on the screen here, but basically it is a mission, a field test where they test the astronauts or product in an environment that is very similar to space. That's why NASA has a giant pool and they have a mock-up of the International Space Station where they can do test runs on spacewalks or different stuff like that. But when they need to do for longer term missions, they use a underwater habitat off the coast of Florida called Aquarius. And to this date, they've had 23 missions there, and they're called the NEMO missions, which stands for NASA's Extreme Environment Mission Operations. Here's some pictures of those operations, a couple of them. And as you can see, they're doing different rudimentary tasks. One of them, I think they even experiment on how to operate on an asteroid, and they've done stuff for Mars and the moon, preparing astronauts to be able to work in that, and they've monitored how they react and so forth and so on. And the other thing with Aquarius is it's not a very big habitat. It's about the size of a school bus, so it's small and compact, and you get a bunch of people in there for days or weeks at a time, and they're able to monitor the psychological effects of what goes on when you put people together and they're not leave. Now that we've had the space stations for quite some time, we're able to pretty much see the same thing. So it's not as important as it once was, but they can still use this before they spend the money and the time to send somebody into space. They can put them in here and just see how that all acts out. NASA's a big one that gets a lot of talk, especially here in the United States, but there's a bunch of other organizations and companies doing similar things. You've got SpaceX, Arianespace, ESA, Axiom Space, and a bunch of others that are working towards, putting men, people, women, whatever into space. And the question ends up being, hey, Aquarius, this underwater habitat, is an aging habitat, and talk here in our underwater community per se is, hey, it's rumors are it's at the end of its life, and they keep on talking about scrapping it or whatever. So what happens at that point in time? Is there still the need for those space analog missions underwater, that is? And if so, who are they going to turn to and what are they going to do? So here comes my own little selfish plug here a little bit for ASC, and also for a counterpart we have over in Turkey. He's working on a space analog system, and he's been working with ESA and talking to them about trying to get contracts and to build the prototype for that. And meanwhile, our design, which is in the bottom right there, is it's a universal design where it's not designed necessarily for space analogs or for anything, but it's a universal platform where you can use it for whatever. So there are, and the point of this is, say there are organizations and there are companies out there who are interested in fulfilling that hole and that need, if it so arises. And there's another, and talking about the engineering and the design aspect here is another area where might be a little bit of a stretch, but that where the oceans can come into play as well. And that is, if you're able to build something to withstand the rigors of being in the water, under the water, the pressures, the water tightness, the self-sufficiency, and it works underwater, it will most likely work in a space environment as well. They'll be over-engineered almost to an extent because of the pressures you have to deal with the ocean. So if you have somebody developing a space module, or you wanted to test it underwater and run a analog mission in it, so your people would be the ones training in their actual habitat or their actual space station or moon base or whatever, you could do that and do it underwater. Like I say, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but it is a different take on the possibilities and the ways that the ocean can definitely help be a platform for space. Another thing to look at is the ocean itself, maybe not underwater, but just the surface level and what it does for the space industry. And we've seen Elon and SpaceX has borrowed from old technology and upped it, made it sexy per se, and made it more popular to the population, but launching and landing rockets at sea. We have 72% of our planet is ocean, and it is a great place to be landing or propose launching spaceships from it. The benefits in this is that noise pollution, that becomes an issue. SpaceX is running into those issues right now in Texas, that as well as the possibility of, if you have a rapid unscheduled disassembly, you're going to have parts and stuff like that. Both these are negated out in the sea. Also, if you really want to get down into the rabbit trail, there is looking at the lack of government oversight and interference when you get far enough out to the ocean. That opens up some unique possibilities. So I've talked a lot about the ways that the ocean is giving back or similar to space. But how does everybody looking down from the space station or from moon and stuff like that, how are they giving back to the ocean environment? I think one of those is the technology. I think it's very clear that because of the budgets and having to push the extremes that the technology developed, it can be definitely given back in different ways. I've heard other people already mentioning and talking about some of these things today already, as it was water reclamation, oxygen production, energy creation, and the consumption of that. How do you limit all those things when you're in an environment that is limited all these things, and you're trying to be self-sufficient and you're trying to distance yourself from the rest of the world? Ocean has its benefits from the standpoint that you don't have to be that far out right now, but I think the end goal for a lot of that is, and you're able to reuse a bunch of that down there. One thing I like to say and like to think about, and it may not be 100% accurate, but it's that the oceans may be the training bed for the astronauts, but that the space is the technology developer for aquanauts. And what I mean by that is, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but that, as with the NEMO missions and the ocean and everything you can do there to prepare people for the environment of weightlessness and being in outer space. And meanwhile, you've got NASA building great ways to reuse water, or minimize the use of oxygen and with scrubbers and all that kind of stuff too. So I think it's a very interesting look at those two. An aquanaut, by the way, as I've mentioned here, is basically anyone that remains underwater and breathing the ambient pressure of the water around them for a minimum of 24 hours. And to that point, we look at just recently here in the news that it points to we are still very much pioneers in this area. This is, even though we've been doing it for 50, 60 years, space and the ocean, we're still at the infancy of everything. Just last month, Navy veteran Joe DeTuri, he spent a record-breaking 100 days in underwater habitats. We're in the year 2023. We've had underwater habitats for 60-some years, and we finally got to the point where somebody's spend that much time under there. The science community is right now going over everything, because he had wires on him the whole time he's down there, and he says he even shrunk half an inch while he's down there. And we're trying to figure out, is that due to pressure? Was it due to the cramped quarters? What was it? So there, once again, more similarities to space. And I'm going to butcher these next names. I already know it, so just bear with me. But space has also set records. And you look at 100 days, in that when you look at the space, it's not even comparable, because you've got Mark Vander Key, I guess, I'm 100% sure there. He was on the International Space Station for 355 days. And then you've got cosmonaut Valery Polyakov and Mir for 437 days. And even though those are ridiculous amounts of time to be spent in space, they're nothing compared to what we're going to be spending in space here in the very near future, whether it's the moon or Mars. We're looking at years of people having to be on there at a period of time. And how does that interact? I think that the desire to push the boundaries and explore the mysteries of the unknown is really what unites us here in our commonality more than almost anything else. There are a lot of similarities. I think if we sat here and took notes, we could compare a huge list of similarities between the two different environments. But a few of the ones that I think really stand out are, both of them require tons of topside support. To get anything into space, you've got a launch complex, you've got communications, you've got training, you've got et cetera. And same thing with the ocean. If you're going to get anything massive underwater, you've got massive topside support of ships and barges and everything like that. And then the communication and oxygen and electricity that has to be pumped down to it. To get to those locations, then too, if you're going deep into the water, you're in a tight, cramped tin can. On the left, you've got an astronaut there. On the right, you've got a man in a deep sea submergence vehicle. Both of them are it's all a bunch of knobs and switches and metal, and it's claustrophobic. Fortunately, once again, talking back to SpaceX, they've done some groundbreaking stuff with making Dragon capsule a little bit more spacious, but it's still tight, and it's still very up to date. Suits. We got a space suit on the left and a diver suit on the right there, and both of them protect the people from the elements around them. They're very similar in look and could almost be transposed to each other's different field if need be. Both of them are working in extreme working conditions. I've got, when I went out to speak about this topic here, there was a bunch of different ways I could go with it. And that's why I'm kind of giving a really quick over the 30,000 foot view here of what we're doing, because there's so many different areas. And this is more, I'm feeling this is more like a palate cleanser for some of the people who've been sitting there doing some very analytical and good conversations today. And I didn't want this to be a super analytical conversation. I wanted it to be more thought-provoking and just informational to an extent, and light, because we are living in an exciting time. I can only sense the people back in the late 60s when they're watching, the Apollo missions and that space race developing, and we're in a very similar one now. We are blessed and fortunate to be living when we are right now, with the money and the resources and the internet to make the world a much smaller place and to help each other grow these communities and to reach out and do what we're doing and have these events like this. I'm going to start closing a little bit here, but I think the big thing we need to do is we can work together. Does the science community, the space community need the ocean community? Probably not. And likewise, we probably don't need each other, but there's a bunch of different information, as I spoke about here, and experiences that we can share with each other to better ourselves and to grow each community accordingly. There's a lot of people that are very interested in the space community who are never going to go to space, but they have this knowledge that they can share with the rest of the world, and that the underwater community can benefit from. There have been astronauts who have been aquanauts and have spent time in space as well as underwater for days on time. Scott Carpenter is one I can think of, that he was an astronaut who then spent time underwater and actually made phone calls from both locations to the Earth. So there's a lot that can be shared here. I think that we can't be an island unto our own when it comes to some of this information and technology. And I don't think we are. I think it's definitely something that we can't not say enough. The other thing is, inspiration. Where does that come from? And, as I have designed, drawn, and thought about underwater habitats for quite a while now, it's one of the things I constantly look at is what is space doing? What can I use from established designs and elements? The docking collar on the International Space Station has been a big one for me. Is like eventually we're going to need docking collars on underwater habitats as they grow into colonies and become bigger. And how do you make that happen? And will a similar docking collar like that's what on the International Space Station work for underwater? So whether it's very mechanical inspiration or from nature or just a dream, it's there's a lot you can take from that. What else we got? So I still got a couple things I want to go over, but I want to thank everybody first off for just taking the time out of their day this weekend to be here, to share your information, to share your visions, to share your products. I think, once again, like I said, this is important for us to be having these communities and these communications with each other. I've got a couple plugs here that might help some people out. It's more informational type, but if you're one that wants to experience that weightlessness and try space without having to go to space, there are places here especially in the United States, that you can do that. Jules Undersea Lodge. It is in Florida. This is where the 100 days was spent underwater. It is a old scientific underwater habitat that has been retrofitted, and anybody can go spend the night there, go have supper there, whatever. And you can get your aquanaut license. I did it last year. I am an aquanaut. I spent over 24 hours under there, but they teach you how to scuba dive. You can spend time outside floating around. You're living in a tin can underwater. So it's basically like, an analog mission of sorts there. You can do that. It's interesting. It's an experience. And for those of us who may not get to go to space, but want to experience something similar, that's probably about the closest you're going to get for the layman here on Earth. Another informational piece for a lot of people out there is the Sea Sitting Institute. And I don't know if people are familiar with them. I wasn't for the longest time, but they're a nonprofit organization whose her focus is helping floating cities, floating colonies, etc. They're working actually right now on their own flag, and their big thing is creating the government outside of the regular governments, because their plan is to be out in international waters where there are no governments. So they primarily focus on sustainability, governance, etc. And that might be interesting to some of the people who may be looking at individual communities on the moon or Mars or whatever like that they've done a lot of legwork in what that looks like here on Earth. And even with a lot of the different companies, they have a bunch of different organizations under them and companies who are working on sustainable floating platforms and floating houses. And a lot of that is very self-sufficient, and the psychological and the financial and all that kind of stuff that comes into play, which once again will be required in space too. So it's another area where there's a lot going on here on Earth that the space community can benefit from, looking at how they're doing it and what mistakes they're making, as well as what gains they're making too. I think that's pretty much about all I got. Like I say, it was all over the place. I understand that. but I was trying to throw a bunch of stuff in here. I figured if there's anything that really stuck out to somebody, we can discuss it in the questions. We don't have a few minutes left, I know, but here's the best way to contact me. Don't spend too much time on social media for the most part, but all of our socials are at atlantaseacolony.com. I answer most of them from there. You can email me. LinkedIn's a good way, but even though I'm sometimes slow in responding there too. But that being said, yeah, if there's any certain area you want me to dive more into, I guess you'll just have to have me back next year. I don't know, or just no, but just seriously, but you can just shoot me a message or answer questions really quick in here and we can go from there. But otherwise, thank you very much, guys. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Brendon. And is there any questions so far? I don't have any on chat, actually.
Good.
I have a comment. You were talking about underwater places to stay. There is actually one in Sweden, which I think was the second commercially available. Utterin is called, which is Otterin. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them that you enter from the top and you've got like a little house above, and you can go under. But besides, Jules is the only way you get to it is you have to scuba dive down to it, so it's completely cut off from the topside world. And the other one obviously is Aquarius, where NASA uses NEMO missions, but in order to go there, it's quite expensive, and you have to have a scientific team to go down there. And there have been others in the past, but a lot of them have just stopped working because financially it's hard to be profitable.
Maybe another question. How are there any underwater habitats up and running as where people are living as such, or are they just research facilities like that?
Yeah, so up till now, almost all of them have been either funded by government or like big oil back in the 60s. As scientific research and development. There have been attempts, there's a bunch of different plans and designs out there, as always, for everything, for more human rated ones. But so far, there have not been any built for long term. There have been some that have been tested, but nothing permanent. And I think the biggest thing is, how do you make that financially profitable? And that is the biggest question. Our last person guest speaking was talking about how the moon at first it won't be for resorts and stuff along those lines, and same thing with the ocean. Everybody wants to talk about underwater hotels, but realistically that's not a financially profitable way of doing it at this point in time. So I think that really you're not going to see underwater habitats focused towards mankind. We're focusing more towards underwater data centers and more industrial type of things at this point in time, because there's a bigger profit margin there. That way can pave the way for more humans to be able to live underwater down the road. But that's kind of off the conversation. But yeah, so to answer your question, no, not right now. It's all scientific research institutions, except for that one in Florida, Jules, which used to be and is now open to the public.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, so I'll kind of answer my follow-up question there in that I was going to ask how long time before, but if it's economy that is breaking it is very difficult. Is there the technology needed? Is there, do you think? Or
yeah, oh yeah, the technology is there, and I think that's one of the things I said. We're living in the great time right now because technology has caught up so much to a bunch of these visions that we had in the 60s, 70s, 80s of living in the year 2000 or 2020. And all that technology now exists for space travel as well as here on Earth. Flying cars are right around the corner, electric cars are here, all that kind of stuff. And same thing with underwater. The technology is here. It's just such a great barrier right now to get those first ones in there, to lay that foundation and to prove the concept that it's viable to humans at a cost-effective rate. Because there are underwater hotels out there right now, but they're thousands and thousands of dollars a night. And that's just not viable. I have a thing called the grandma. I know we're out of time here, but basically if my grandma cannot come and stay underwater, then it's not viable in my opinion, because whatever you do has to be easily fluid from the land to the ocean. And I think that's going to be the same thing with space eventually too, is to open it up to the masses, you have to make that transition as simplified and as seamless as possible. And that's just not here yet.
Yeah, good point. Seems like we have a fair bit to learn, and as you say, it's actually structurally, it's actually more difficult to live underwater than on the
Yep.
moon, because that's more than an atmosphere pressure, and it's from
Right.
the outside as well.
Yep, pretty much.
So, and thank you so much.
No, thank you.
A quite inspiring discussion there.
Yep, great presentation. Thank you.
I appreciate it.